I am Walter Hale, though most folks in the small-town insurance business just call me Walt. I am 68 years old, and 3 weeks ago I inherited a condemned boathouse on a dying lake, while my daughter received our $9 million lakefront estate. My own daughter looked me in the eye and called me a burden before her husband's security guard walked me to the door. So that night, I drove out to that rotting boathouse to sleep, because I had nowhere else left to go. But when I pried open that swollen wooden door, what I found inside made my blood run cold. Before I get into it, tell me in the comments what state you're watching from tonight. It means more to this old man than you know. And if you've ever had family try to convince you that you were losing your mind, stay with me, because what happened next will change how you see the people you trust most. Let me take you back to the morning everything fell apart. It was a wet Thursday, exactly 17 days after we buried my wife, Diane. 42 years of marriage. 42 years of building a modest but steady life. I ran a small insurance agency out of a strip mall for 3 decades, and Diane kept the books tighter than any accountant I ever met. We weren't flashy people. We drove old trucks and clipped coupons even after we didn't need to. But somewhere in there, quietly, patiently, we became wealthy. Land Diane bought decades ago on a whim turned into a lakefront empire worth more than either of us ever dreamed. We built our forever home on Cedar Hollow Lake, 9 bedrooms of glass and timber overlooking the water, and I figured someday it would pass to our daughter, Paige, the way these things do. I sat in the office of Harold Bevins, our family attorney for 20 years, in a room that smelled like old paper and grief. Across the table sat Paige and her husband, Trent, dressed like they were headed to a gala instead of sitting through the reading of my wife's will. Trent kept checking his phone under the table like he had somewhere better to be. I sat there in my one good suit, hollowed out, still not able to fully believe Diane was gone. Harold cleared his throat and started reading. The lakefront estate, every square foot of it, the house Diane and I had poured our whole lives into, was to be transferred immediately and entirely to Paige and Trent. I nodded slowly, expecting that. What I did not expect was what came next. According to the will, I, Diane's husband of 42 years, was left a single piece of property. An abandoned, condemned boathouse on the far shore of Miller's Lake, 2 hours north, a place we'd bought years ago as an afterthought and never once visited. That was it. That was my entire inheritance. I asked Harold, my voice shaking, if there'd been some mistake. Before he could answer, Trent snatched the papers off the table and let out a short, ugly laugh. "You heard him, Walt," he said, his voice thick with contempt I'd never heard from him before. "The house is ours now. Diane knew you couldn't keep up with a property like this on your own anymore. Frankly, an old man rattling around 9 empty bedrooms is a liability, not a homeowner." My own daughter did not correct him. She just looked at the table, silent, her jaw tight. I don't remember the drive back to the house. I remember packing 2 suitcases while a hired man I'd never seen before stood in the doorway of my own bedroom, watching me like I might steal something. By 4 that afternoon, I was standing in the marble foyer with my bags, and Paige finally spoke to me directly for the first time since the will was read. "Dad, it's not personal," she said, not quite meeting my eyes. "You just need somewhere quieter, somewhere you can rest." Trent's assistant handed me a small, unlabeled pill bottle. "For your blood pressure," Paige added. "Mom wanted you to have them. Take 2 a day." I stood there holding that bottle in my palm while the front door closed behind me, sealing me out of the only home I had left. I found my old Chevy pickup parked crooked behind Trent's row of German sports cars, tossed my bags in, and sat there a long moment staring at the pills. No label, no pharmacy sticker, no dosage, just plain white tablets rattling in clear plastic. Diane was meticulous about everything. She wouldn't have handed me unmarked medication, not in 100 years. But grief makes a man doubt his own good sense, and I told myself I was imagining things. I called Paige from the truck before I pulled out of the driveway. I needed to hear her say it wasn't true, that this whole thing was some clerical mix-up. Instead, I heard laughter in the background, glasses clinking, the sound of a party already underway. "Dad," she said, her voice suddenly warm and syrupy in a way that didn't match the woman from the foyer 20 minutes earlier. "Are you doing okay? Do you need us to send someone to help you get settled up north?" "Paige," I said, keeping my voice level. "Why did your mother leave me a condemned boathouse and leave you the entire estate? And what exactly are these pills?" She sighed, the practiced sigh of someone bearing a heavy cross. "Dad, we talked about this. Mom knew the taxes and upkeep on a house like this would bankrupt you on a fixed income. She was protecting you. And those pills, your memory's been slipping. You know that. You've been forgetting things. Mom had them specially made for you before she passed. Please just take them, for her. I sat in that parking garage a long time, turning the logic over in my head, hating how much sense it almost made. Diane had always been sharp about money, ruthlessly practical. Maybe she really had decided the estate was too much burden for me alone. I told myself that. I popped the cap, shook a single tablet into my palm, and swallowed it dry. I merged onto the state highway as the sun started dropping behind the tree line. About 35 minutes into the drive, the world outside my windshield began to swim. My hands started shaking on the wheel. My chest went tight and cold, and a wave of nausea hit me so hard I had to wrestle the truck onto the shoulder before everything went black. I woke with a violent gasp, drenched in sweat, the dashboard clock reading past 9 at night. I'd been out cold on the side of the highway for almost 3 hours. I rolled the window down and let the cold night air slap some sense back into my skull. I spent 30 years running an insurance agency built on spotting fraud, fake claims, staged accidents, people lying to my face with a straight expression. My mind, fogged as it was, started doing what it always did. It started finding the holes in the story. Those weren't blood pressure pills. Diane would never send unmarked medication home with me, not once in 42 years. Someone had drugged me and put me behind the wheel of a truck on a winding 2-lane road at dusk. If I'd gone off that shoulder a half-second later, it would have looked exactly like a tragic accident, a grieving old widower who lost control of his vehicle. I reached over, grabbed the bottle, and hurled it out the window into the dark. I heard it skitter off into the ditch. I sat there, breathing hard, no longer a confused old man mourning his wife. I was a man who had just survived something meant to kill him. I got back on the road and pushed north toward Miller's Lake, my mind racing the whole way. By the time I found the gravel turnoff, the moon was already high, throwing long shadows across the water. The boathouse sat exactly the way I remembered from photographs decades old, worse actually. The roof sagged. The dock had rotted through in 3 places. Weeds had swallowed the front steps whole. It looked like the kind of place nobody would ever think to look for anything, let alone a man they wanted gone. I stepped out, grabbed a flashlight from behind the seat, and started walking the perimeter, old habits kicking in the same instincts that had made me good at spotting a fraudulent claim. Foundation cracks, water damage, structural rot. This place was beyond saving. There was no earthly financial reason Diane, careful as she was about money, would have held onto a worthless slab like this for decades. It made no sense, unless it wasn't worthless at all. I kept walking past the boathouse, following the tree line down toward the water, and that's when my flashlight beam caught something wrong in the dirt. Fresh tire tracks. Deep, heavy, recently made not from some wandering fisherman's sedan, but from something with real weight behind it. And there were dozens of them overlapping, forming a clear, worn path where there shouldn't have been any traffic at all in years. I followed them through a stand of pines and came out at a second structure I hadn't known. Was there a long, low storage building faced in corrugated steel, painted and weathered to blend into the trees like it wanted to disappear. Running up the side of it, half hidden by brush, was a thick black cable connected to a pole 100 yards off. Industrial power, the kind you run for server equipment, refrigeration, heavy machinery not for an abandoned storage shed nobody's supposed to remember exists. I could feel a low hum in the ground under my boots. Someone was pulling serious electricity into a building that was supposed to be nothing. I turned back toward the boathouse to sit and think, my mind spinning through everything I'd seen. I pushed the swollen door open, and the hinges screamed into the dark like something alive. Dust and mildew hit me the second I stepped inside. There was one chair in the middle of the room, draped in a sheet gone gray with age. I pulled the sheet off and sank into it, trying to piece together what any of this meant. The tracks, the power line, Diane's uncharacteristic secrecy when my phone rang so loud in the silence, I nearly came out of my skin. It was Trent's wife, no. It was Paige, my own daughter, calling me at 9:30 at night, hours after throwing me out of my own home. "Dad," she said, breathless. "Thank God you picked up. Did you make it there safe? Listen, have you walked the property yet? Did you happen to find the old storage shed out back? Mom used to talk about that place. Did you go inside?" The specificity of it hit me like a fist to the gut. She wasn't calling to check if I'd survived a 3-hour drive on unmarked pills. She was calling about the shed, the very shed wired into an industrial power grid. I understood in that instant this call was a trap, and if I told her the truth, I might not live to see morning. I let my voice go slow and slurred, dragging every word out like I could barely hold my eyes open. "No, honey," I mumbled. "I didn't go anywhere. Those pills your mother left me. I feel like I'm underwater. Barely made it in the front door. I think I'm just going to sleep for a week." There was a pause on the line, calculating, and then something cold slid into her voice that I'd never heard from my daughter before in my life. "Oh, Dad, I'm so sorry the drive wore you out. Just rest. Don't worry about the shed tonight. We'll talk in a few days." The line went dead. She didn't say she loved me. She didn't offer to check on me in the morning. She just hung up, satisfied that whatever was in that bottle had done exactly what it was supposed to do. I stood up slowly from that dusty chair, understanding now with total clarity that if Paige was that desperate to know whether I'd been inside that shed, there was something in there worth killing for. I crept to the front window, its glass cracked and filthy, and looked out over the moonlit yard toward the long gravel drive. For a long while, nothing moved. Then, far down the road, two headlights appeared, crawling slow, and then they cut off entirely, plunging into total darkness, though I could still hear tires crunching gravel in the black. A dark SUV rolled to a stop near the tree line, maybe 100 yards off, engine cutting out. They weren't here to check on me. They'd come to finish the job. My first instinct was to call 911, but I stopped myself. Trent's family had money tied into half the county donations to the sheriff's re-election fund, golf trips with the district attorney. I couldn't be sure who'd show up if I called, or whose side they'd be on once they got here. I needed someone I trusted with my life. I scrolled to a name I hadn't called in years, Ray Delgado, my old Army buddy from 4 decades back, who'd spent 25 years after the service doing private security work in places I never asked too many questions about. Ray picked up on the second ring. I didn't waste time on hello. "Ray, I'm in trouble. I'm out at the Miller's Lake property. There's a vehicle sitting dark by the tree line. No lights, just watching. I think Paige and Trent sent them." Silence on the other end then, flat and steady. "Give me your coordinates. I'm 20 minutes out. Don't engage. Find something heavy. Stay hidden." I found an old boat oar leaning behind the kitchen door, splintered but solid, and gripped it tight enough to hurt my knuckles. I slipped out the back and worked my way through the brush toward the shed, staying low, watching 2 men in dark tactical gear climb out of the SUV. They moved like professionals, synchronized, silent, communicating with hand signals. One of them pulled out a small electronic device, holding it up to the shed's doorframe, a biometric bypass scanner, the kind used to crack high-end digital locks. They didn't so much as glance toward the boathouse where they thought I was passed out cold. They walked straight past it, weapons raised, heading dead for the shed. Whatever they wanted, it wasn't me, not yet. I followed at a distance, stepping in their own footprints to keep quiet, until Ray's hand clamped over my mouth from behind and pulled me down into the brush. "Easy, Walt. It's me." He'd arrived without a sound. He studied the 2 men through the dark with cold, professional focus. 2 targets, armed, armored. We take them together. I've got the one on the left. You take the right knees, not the chest. They're wearing vests. He held up 3 fingers, then 2, then 1, and we moved. I swung the oar hard and low, catching the guard across the back of his knee. He dropped with a strangled grunt, his weapon skittering into the dirt. Ray had the other one down and unconscious inside of 10 seconds. A chokehold executed with brutal, practiced efficiency. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely hold the oar upright, my heart hammering against my ribs like it wanted out. Ray zip-tied both men, stripped their weapons, tossed them into the brush, and pulled a sleek black key card off the first guard's vest. He wiped the mud away and held it to the moonlight. My stomach dropped. Stamped across the front in silver was Trent's company logo, the same firm whose business card he'd handed me proudly, not 4 months ago, calling it his new venture in private capital. My own son-in-law had sent armed men to kill me. Ray pressed the card against a hidden panel on the shed door. It clicked open, and behind the rusted corrugated facade stood a heavy steel bulkhead, straight out of a bunker-thick hinges, a glowing biometric scanner beside a keypad. This was no shed. This was something Diane had built and hidden in total secrecy. "No wires, no external power box," Ray murmured, running a gloved hand along the seam. "Closed-loop system. You need a retinal scan or a master code. Nothing else gets you through. I stared at the keypad, 10 digits blinking, demanding, and something surfaced from deep in my memory. Diane. In her last conscious hours in that hospital bed, gripping my hand and whispering a string of numbers over and over. 6, 1, 4, 0. I'd thought it was the morphine talking. Trent had actually rolled his eyes at her bedside, muttering that she was losing her grip. I had believed him. I had been wrong. 4 digits weren't enough for a 10-digit code. I thought like Diane would think, precise, sentimental but never careless. Our wedding date, September the 9th, 1980. 6 digits if I dropped the century. 090980. Combined with the 4 numbers she'd whispered to me, that was exactly 10. My hands trembled as I typed it in. The scanner blinked red, held for 3 agonizing seconds, then flashed green. A deep mechanical groan rolled through the door as hydraulic seals released, and the massive bulkhead swung open into a rush of cold, filtered air. Inside was nothing like the world outside. Clean concrete floors, soundproofed walls, rows of server racks blinking with quiet blue and green lights, cables running down into the floor drawing power straight from that industrial line outside. At the back of the room stood a reinforced steel vault, and on a desk beneath a single hanging light sat a plain white envelope with my name written across it in Diane's unmistakable handwriting. My hands shook so badly I nearly tore it opening the seal. Inside was a letter dated 3 weeks before her diagnosis turned fatal. The ink smudged in places like she'd been crying while she wrote it. My dearest Walter, if you are reading this, it means I am gone, and it means you finally found your way here. I am so sorry for the lies. I built this place because I discovered something about Trent I could not unsee. 18 months ago, he asked me to review the books for his new investment firm. I found what he didn't want me to find: layers of shell accounts, routing numbers that led nowhere honest, money moving through our own family name. Our son-in-law is laundering cartel money through real estate, Walter, and he was planning to use our estate as his cover. I could not confront him directly. I needed time. So I played the part of a fading old woman while I quietly moved everything that mattered out of his reach. I hid our true fortune here. I left him the house and the visible accounts as bait, so he would believe he'd won while I protected what truly matters. If my heart gave out early, Walter, it did not give out on its own. Open the vault. Don't let him take what's left of you. The bunker seemed to grow colder around me. Diane had suspected they were speeding along her death. My beautiful, careful wife, murdered by the same people who'd handed me those pills. I made a low sound I didn't recognize as my own voice. Ray put a hand on my shoulder, silent, steady, ready to go to war beside me. I folded the letter and walked to the vault. Using the same code, I spun the dial and pulled the door open. No stacks of cash, no gold, but to a man who'd spent 30 years reading the fine print of financial ruin, what sat on those shelves was worth more. Bundled bearer bonds, deeds to properties I'd never known we owned. Offshore account documents worth, by my rough count, somewhere north of $70 million. Diane had spent the last 2 years of her life quietly bleeding our visible wealth dry and pouring it here, out of Trent's reach, while everyone around her believed she was simply losing her mind. But if she'd protected everything else, why hand Trent the entire $9 million estate outright? That contradicted everything. I went back through the vault and found, tucked into the bottom shelf, a thick red folder marked simply "Liability" in Diane's sharp handwriting. Inside were pages of forensic notes, routing numbers, phantom renovation invoices, shell companies, all tied directly to our lakefront address. Diane had discovered that the estate itself had been quietly turned into the laundering hub, mortgaged and leveraged without my knowledge, dirty cartel money washing through fake landscaping contracts and phantom pool installations. If the property had passed to me, I would have been the name on the deed when federal agents came knocking. She hadn't left Trent a gift. She'd left him a loaded gun pointed at his own head and stepped out of the blast radius entirely, taking me with her. I set the folder down, a grim understanding settling over me, when Ray moved toward a second terminal and pulled up a folder on the desktop labeled simply, quietly, Walter, and beneath it, a subfolder, Investigator Files. My chest tightened. Diane had hired someone. She'd known she was surrounded by threats and needed proof. "You sure you want to see this?" Ray asked quietly. I nodded, though my throat had gone dry as chalk. He clicked the final file. The footage showed Diane in her hospital bed, thin and fragile, machines beeping steadily around her. The timestamp read barely 3 hours before she died. The door opened. Trent walked in alone, dressed for dinner, checking his watch with the same irritation you'd show a delayed flight. "She's taking too long," he said flatly into the empty room, not knowing the camera was recording every word. "The people I answer to need this resolved by Friday." He pulled a syringe from his jacket pocket, filled with something clear, and injected it directly into her IV line without a flicker of hesitation. Diane's body arched off the mattress. The monitors screamed. He stood there and watched her die, checking his phone once more before pressing the call button for the nurses and dropping into a chair, arranging his face into grief just before they burst through the door. I sat frozen in that chair, staring at the paused image of my wife's still body, and felt the last of my sorrow burn away into something cold and absolute. They had murdered her, and tonight they had tried to murder me too. Before I could speak, the lights above us flickered and cut out, and a deafening alarm tore through the bunker. The perimeter sensors had been triggered. Ray was already at the security console, pulling up a bank of camera feeds Diane had rigged across the entire property. 4 black SUVs tore up the gravel drive, headlights blazing now, no more pretense of stealth. A dozen armed men in tactical gear poured out, moving with the brutal precision of people who did this for a living. They bypassed the boathouse entirely, forming a tight perimeter around the shed. And stepping out of the lead vehicle, dressed in a dark jacket, his face pale with something between fury and terror, was Trent. Paige climbed out beside him, her arms wrapped around herself against the cold. They hadn't stayed home waiting for a phone call confirming my death. They'd come to watch it happen. "They're in debt to whoever they work for," I said slowly, the pieces locking together. "They lost the cartel's money somewhere. They need what's in this vault to pay it back, or they're both dead. That's why the pills. That's why the drive. They needed me gone, and the fortune claimed before the debt came due." Ray was already reinforcing the lockdown, steel bolts slamming into place around the bulkhead with a sound like a judge's gavel. "They're not breaching that without serious explosives," he said. "And if they use them, they bury exactly what they came for." I sat down at the terminal, my hands steadier now than they'd been all night, and started digging through the system. Diane wouldn't have built all this without a final failsafe. It took me less than 4 minutes to find it, buried under a file name matching our wedding date, a program called Last Word. It was a dead man's switch, coded to fire the moment it was triggered, sending everything, the ledgers, the shell company records, the murder footage directly to the FBI's Cybercrimes Division and the DEA field office. I stared at the blinking cursor a long moment, understanding there was no walking this back once I pressed enter. My daughter would go down with her husband. There was no version of this where she came out clean. I thought of Diane's voice in that hospital bed, whispering numbers to a husband she trusted to finish what she'd started. I pressed enter. The upload bar began crawling forward 10%, 3060, every megabyte, tightening a noose. Neither of them could see yet. Outside, I heard Trent's voice through a bullhorn, distorted and echoing across the property. "Walt, we know you're in there. Open the door, hand over the vault, and we'll make it quick." Just like her mother. The cruelty in that last line didn't break me. It steadied me. The upload hit 100% just as a violent screech of tearing metal erupted from the bulkhead. A blinding white light seared through the seam where the door met the frame. "Thermal lance," Ray said grimly, drawing the pistol he'd taken off the first guard and pressing a second one into my hand. It felt impossibly heavy. "Cover behind the racks. Don't fire till they're through." I crouched low, the steel biting cold against my back, watching molten metal drip in glowing rivulets down the door. My eyes caught a small red button on the desk console, an external broadcast system, Diane's own two-way speaker rigged to the outdoor PA. I crawled to it, low and fast, and pressed it down. "Trent," I said, my voice carrying out across the frozen property through the exterior speakers. "You are never touching a single dollar of this. I found the ledgers. I found the footage. I know exactly who you've been laundering money for, and they're going to hear about it long before you're out of that mud." The lance outside went silent for a moment. I could hear him shouting at the crew to keep cutting, but there was real fear cracking through his voice now. "You're lying, old man," he screamed into the megaphone. "You're bluffing to buy time." "I'm not buying time," I said calmly. "I'm just keeping you talking while federal agents mobilize. 10 minutes ago, Every record of your operation went straight to the DEA and the FBI. The house you murdered my wife for is being seized as we speak. You have nothing left, Trent, nothing." A ragged, furious scream answered me, and the lance roared back to life. Sparks showered the concrete. Ray knelt beside me, pistol raised, breathing slow and even. Ready. The door gave way with a final metallic shriek, smoke pouring through the breach, laser sights cutting erratic lines through the haze. And then, before a single shot could be fired, the ceiling above us thundered with the deep rhythmic beat of helicopter blades. Blinding light sliced down through gaps in the roof. A booming voice cut across the property. "Federal agents, you are surrounded. Drop your weapons." The armed men outside froze, then dropped their rifles one by one, hands rising into the air as federal vehicles flooded the property in a wave of flashing light. Through the security feed, I watched Trent and Paige break into a panicked sprint for the tree line, abandoning their own security detail. Trent went down hard in the mud, sobbing, begging one of the very men he'd hired to help him up. The man spat in his face and walked away. Federal agents dragged him up by the arms, his tailored jacket ruined, his face streaked with mud and tears. Paige was tackled 20 yards farther, sobbing my name into the frozen grass. Ray and I stepped out of the bunker into a scene lit red and blue, helicopters circling overhead, agents securing the perimeter. A tall agent in a bureau jacket approached and extended his hand. "Mr. Hale, Special Agent Doyle, we received your wife's files 11 minutes ago. It's airtight. Congratulations, you just handed us the biggest laundering case this field office has seen in a decade." I walked past him to where Trent knelt in the mud, flanked by 2 agents. He looked up at me, and for one fractured second I saw the boy who used to help me change the oil in that old truck, back before money and greed swallowed whatever decency he'd ever had. "Dad, Walt, please," he choked. "Tell them it's a misunderstanding. I'm family." "You stopped being family," I said quietly, "the moment you put that needle in her arm." Paige screamed something behind him, turning on her own husband, telling the agents it had all been his idea, that he'd threatened her family if she didn't go along. Trent's face collapsed into pure disbelief as his own wife abandoned him in real time. I felt nothing watching it. Just a long, quiet emptiness where rage used to live. Agent Doyle informed Trent, right there in the mud, that a federal judge had already signed off on an emergency seizure order. Every account, every property, frozen. He was bankrupt before he ever reached a jail cell. I handed the agent the empty pill bottle I'd kept in my jacket pocket the whole drive back, along with a description of exactly what had happened on that highway. "Add attempted murder of a federal witness to the list," Doyle said grimly, snapping the evidence bag shut. They loaded both of them into separate cars. The doors slammed. The convoy pulled away down that long gravel drive, taillights disappearing into the dark, until the whole property fell quiet again, except for the wind moving across the water. Ray stood beside me a long while before he finally spoke. "What now, Walt?" I looked at the crumbling boathouse, the shed hiding a fortune, the lake stretching out silver under the moon, and I thought about everything Diane had sacrificed to protect me from a distance she never should have needed to keep. "Now I build," I said. 6 months passed like something out of another life. The federal case against Trent moved fast, fed by evidence so thorough it left his lawyers nothing to work with. Cartel contacts, banking officials, and enforcers were rounded up within days of the raid. Trent and Paige stood trial together and were sentenced separately. Trent for racketeering and first-degree murder, Paige for her role in the conspiracy, though the judge showed her some leniency for cooperating in the end. Neither of them will breathe free air again for a very long time. With the $70 million finally mine to steward, I didn't want to just sit on it. I tore down the old boathouse and the hidden shed both, and in their place I built something new. A residential center for elderly people who've been financially exploited or abandoned by their own families, staffed with lawyers, forensic accountants, and counselors who understand exactly what it feels like to be discarded by the people who were supposed to love you most. Ray runs security for the whole place now, trading his old gear for a quiet office and a badge that says director. I walk the grounds most evenings, past the garden we planted along the water, and stop at a small bronze plaque set into a stone near the old oak tree. It doesn't mention Trent, or the cartel, or any of the violence. It simply reads, "In loving memory of Diane, whose love outlasted every lie told against it." I trace my fingers over the letters some nights and think about how much she saw coming before I ever did. how much she carried alone so I wouldn't have to carry it at all. She fought a war from a hospital bed and won it from beyond the grave. Money never made us who we were. It was never really about the lake house, or the fortune, or any of it. It was about a woman who loved her husband enough to build an army out of nothing but patience and grit, and a man who's still learning, every single day, what it means to be worthy of that kind of love. If this story kept you with me tonight, hit that subscribe button and tell me, have you ever had to walk away from someone who shared your blood but never deserved your trust? I read every single comment. Thank you for sitting with an old man tonight.